As I noted during our extensive debate in the Judiciary Committee on this bill, it reminds me of a movie, Groundhog's Day. Yes, Groundhog's Day. I feel like Bill Murray. It's that day over and over again. We come back to the same bill because we've extensively debated this bill in the last Congress and bills very similar to it in this Congress. And again, we're here debating this bill, which by any sensible measure, by probably a civics student in a 10th grade or less, would know that this is a seriously flawed bill that will impede legislation and hurt the American public. It's based on a premise that regulations by themselves stifle job creation, a rather unique concept that we have come to debate in our committee and now on the floor. H.R. 367 threatens to undermine vital protections that ensure safety and soundness of the entire range of societal needs, from food safety to clean air and clean water, to workplace safety, to consumer product safety, to financial stability. It does this by bringing most important federal rulemakings, including those that protect the public in the way of health care, the Affordable Care Act, and the implementation thereof, and the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Act aimed at keeping us from the catastrophic days back in 2008 or 9 when the world was coming to an end because of derivatives. It takes the implementation of these two bills to a screeching halt, a result that would put at risk the well-being of millions of Americans, both from fiscal health and physical health. The REINS Act would require that both houses of Congress pass and the President sign a joint resolution of approval within 70 legislative days before a major rule can take effect. In the House, the Committee of Jurisdiction would have but 17 legislative days to consider a joint resolution of approval, after which it would automatically be discharged from the committee and sent to the full House. Certainly not enough time to do a good job of reviewing the regulations. And the House must consider such a resolution either on the second or fourth Thursday of every month, assuming that the House is even in session on that Thursday. The bill also defines a major rule as one of having at least $100 million economic activity or having one of a number of other economic impacts. And all federal agencies issue about 50 to 100 major rules every year. That means if the REINS Act had become law in this year, there would only be 5 days left in 2013 for the House to consider 50 to 100 major rules. And while the other side loves gas, as we've seen with the Farm Bill and THUD, they can't pass it. Given those traps set forth in the bill, no major rule would ever go into effect. This, in turn, threatens agencies' abilities to protect Americans' health, safety, and well-being. It's a way of stifling the opportunity to protect Americans. Another concern with the REINS Act is that the influence of industry lobbyists over rulemaking would tremendously increase. K Street would love it. Given the complexity of the rules at issue and the expedited time frame of congressional consideration, members would instead be bombarded with visits, phone calls, and talking points from industry lobbyists who would no doubt take advantage of the REINS Act's short-circuited process to shape members' views about a particular rule, probably within days of a major fundraiser. On top of all the problems with this bill, it is simply unnecessary. First, to the extent that its proponents are concerned with Congress's accountability for agency rules, there are already numerous tools at our disposal to shape agency rulemaking. For example, Congress can rescind or limit its delegation authority to an agency if an agency acts beyond what we intended. Congress can also disapprove a rule under the Congressional Review Act process, defund enforcement of a rule or an agency through its appropriations and authorization, or overturn specific rules through legislation, and conduct regular oversight activity. Second, to the extent that the REINS Act's proponents claim that the bill is necessary because the Obama administration has inundated the country with costly regulations, the facts simply do not bear this out. Just because you say Obama doesn't mean it's bad. Most Americans like Obama. He's been elected twice president. In an op-ed that appeared in the Memphis Commercial Appeal, Dole McManus cited Cass Sunstein, former director of OIRA, also known as the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, who noted that in President Obama's first 4 years in office, he has issued fewer new federal regulations than any of the 4 presidents who came before him, including Ronald Reagan. Moreover, the op-ed noted this president has revoked hundreds of outmoded rules that produce savings for government, business, and consumers that will add up to billions. Congress has already considered and rejected congressional approval schemes in the past. For instance, Chief Justice John Roberts not exactly a flaming liberal, criticized legislation that was similar to the REINS Act back to 1983 when he was an associate White House counsel. In a memorandum, he objected that such legislation would hobble agency rulemaking by requiring affirmative congressional assent to all major rules and would seem to impose excessive burdens on the regulatory agencies. So before Chief Justice Roberts saved the ACA, he spoke out on this legislation as well in giving us wise counsel. Finally, the broader premise underlying the REINS Act, that regulation stifles economic growth and job creation, is simply false. It's pretty incredible that the proponents of anti-regulatory bills like the REINS Act continue to make this claim in light of the fact there's absolutely no credible evidence establishing the fact that regulations have any substantive impact on job creation. But to not just take my word for it, listen to some respected Republicans and conservatives. Bruce Bartlett, senior policy analyst in the Reagan and George H.W. Bush administration, said, Republicans have a problem. People are increasingly concerned about unemployment, but Republicans have nothing to offer them. The GOP opposes additional government spending for jobs programs and in fact favors big cuts in spending that would likely lead to further layoffs at all levels of government. These constraints, Mr. Bartlett said, have led Republicans to embrace the idea that government regulation is the principal factor holding back employment. They assert that Barack Obama has unleashed a tidal wave of new regulations which has created uncertainty among businesses and prevents them from investing and hiring. He concludes, no hard evidence is offered for this claim. It is simply asserted as self-evident and repeated endlessly throughout the conservative echo chamber as if you say it enough, people will believe it. On the related argument that regulations create business uncertainty, Mr. Bartlett has said regulatory uncertainty is a canard invented by Republicans that allow them to use economic problems to pursue an agenda supported by the business community year in and year out. In other words, it is a simple case of political opportunism, not a serious effort to deal with high unemployment. Now, that was Bruce Bartlett from Reagan and George H.W. Bush days. Susan Dudley, who headed the Office of OIRA during the administration of George W. Bush, has been quoted as saying it is, quote, hard to know what the real impacts of regulations are. She also stated that she was unaware of any, quote, empirically sound way, unquote, to assess the impact that proposed rules have on jobs. And during one of the many hearings held on this issue in the last Congress, the majority's own witness clearly debunked the myth that regulations stymie job creation. Christopher DeMuth with the Conservative American Enterprise Institute, the very conservative American Enterprise Institute, stated in his prepared testimony, quote, the focus on jobs can lead to confusion in regulatory debates, and that, quote, the employment effects of regulation, while important, are indeterminate, unquote. The REINS Act is seriously flawed in its conception based on false premises that regulation kills jobs. Ultimately, it will only serve to needlessly heighten risks to the health and safety, financial and fiscal, of the American people. I strongly urge my colleagues to join me in opposition to H.R. 367, which I feel confident will pass this House and meet a timely death before it gets any light of day in the Senate.